Welcome to our weekly, at this moment, board meeting, where right now we are going through the foundational documents as outlined by protocol.love and working on them for TogetherTec itself. We did the vision a couple weeks ago, and we were going to do the mission last week, but one of us wasn't available, and then two of us weren't available, so we postponed it till this week. So we are going to be looking at the mission. As I stated right before you came, Henley, I have a bit of, well, not a bit. My brain fog is rather large at the moment this week. So I tried to order them in my head or read them through and order them, and it wasn't really working. But they all seem important, which is partly why it's hard to order. And like whether they're important for game B or TogetherTec or time-wise right now, right? Like how many of these are things that we can actually implement right now and how many? And I don't know whether that is part of it, but like that for me was part of processing what was most important and least important. Was like, wait, is it for me? Is it for game B? Is it for TogetherTec? Is it for, like there's things that I think are a high priority, but aren't necessarily TogetherTec's current priority. So anyway, that was just a bit of my going through. Maybe that might be a good place to start.
I had kind of the same vibe as I kept going through it, and I kept sort of getting stuck in the same areas. And I think just a bit about how the conversation last time went, where we were kind of like, I think, crossing wires a bit and not explicitly saying like, oh, okay, here's where I think we should end up versus here's what I think our next steps are. Because I think our next steps are almost never going to be ideal in like the long-term scheme of things. But if the goal is like to get it off the ground, I think that's where like you've got your goals where those will never change. And then you've got the actual like steps or tactics that you plan to take to get you there. And I think the short term, there's going to be a lot of imperfect ideas and solutions to get us to where we want to end up. And so I think it's important as we're talking through it to figure out which part we're talking about. Like, oh, I think long term we'd want to do X, or we want it to serve X role. And then it might be, okay, to get it off the ground, we need to do a certain thing.
And also, I just wanted to reread the vision statement we did decide on, because that will be very tied to it, right? Is our mission going towards that, which I think will be the priority. Anyway, for me anyway, helpful priority. Prioritizing the missions. A vision, a world where abundant resources are available to pro-OmniWin projects.
Yeah, so the mission supports that, right? So so maybe we should just talk through a few, because I think when you're doing a mission, it shouldn't be like the vision. It should be not tied to time. So I think if we're having trouble where things are like, oh, when are we doing this? Then I think that those aren't mission; those are strategy. And I'm trying to pull up the document to see, but my computer is really slow. I don't know if someone else wants to pull it up and share.
That I can even do, even with my broken thing. Because I can copy. It's like copy that's the problem, not the paste. And I copy these URLs pretty easily. It's doing it from here to there that's the problem, not from there to here. I think also in the in here, I think I do have permission to change it, so I can just change it. But there's something that says VIP in order values, improvement, revenue. Oh, I think that's why. That makes so much more sense, because I think we were talking about changing it from profit to revenue. I'm like, that's not what that stands for. That'd be VIR. Never mind. That makes sense now. I remember the conversation from 2 weeks ago. MVP and VIP.
So, do I need to share it then?
I already shared it.
Did you?
In the private chat. Yeah.
Oh, no, I meant share it on the screen so our audience can see what we're reading, but we don't have to.
Yeah, that would be a better. That part URL I did was very, very long. I don't know if anyone's going to be able to type that out and do that, but.
No, I can do that. Let me So yeah, like you said, that's our vision. So these were the suggested brainstorming of the mission statements, not really suggestions. So actually, I'm trying. I don't have a great definition of mission statement off the top of my head. So like local communities, that is something that's a vision, not a mission. I mean, the mission could be build local communities. I think mission or action statements.
Fair enough. So the first one seems to be rather.
I mean, yeah. So I really kind of like that, unless that's missing something or is too expansive. Or so, what do y'all think?
Yeah, let's just read through the other ones and see if there's anything that's missing from there. Because I think you're right. I think that's probably the full picture of it. Profit being important, but not number one. I'm wondering, because I know the next part down where we look at the currency and how do we know if we're meeting the mission, not to get ahead of ourselves, but whether, because I think the part about the VIP, even though it's now wrong, is like that it's in order, that it's like the values, improvement, profit. So like it's like first is this, I actually don't even know what that means. Improvement is like, are we improving the projects we already have?
Like progress over perfection. So like even if it if there's a bit of give and take, as long as it's towards going a net overall win for the values, then yeah, that's fine. But sort of that values are always number one. Trying to improve those values, which is sort of like okay, that's done in context of the values, and then as long as neither of those is ever broken or violated, then the goal is to make profit, but just never at the expense of the values or progress.
Yeah, and then profit or money that is generated is like important, after the other.
Yeah, I've gone back and think about it, and I still think that profit is the correct word, because you also want to keep your expenses low, just like a company would. Where the difference being that it's profit that you then spend, so it becomes an expense. But it's sort of like the two level. There's the absolute expenses like your staff costs and hosting and all that stuff, and then the money that's left over you can then spend on other stuff, on other projects, on.
I think that for me, reading the vision statement, a world where abundant resources are available to pro-OmniWin projects, I really like the first part of the mission because it is like abundant resources, and then we have listed out the resources, right? The knowledge, the digital tools, the mentoring. And I think the rest can probably be not there then, just that first part. My only issue with the 4 is that mentoring is a very specific thing. Like what we do for roundtables isn't really mentoring. It's like peer-to-peer, right? It's not someone who's an expert. And so mentoring / not that we don't want mentoring, that would be great, but we just don't have that in place. But there's also the like peer-to-peer crowdsourced part of it that is many minds that are not yet experts are better than one mind that's not an expert.
Right. I'm also wondering how different mentoring is from the knowledge commons. I guess the knowledge commons is like a database, and then the mentoring is, as you said, a one-on-one.
And so maybe that's it, that it's not mentoring, it's relationships. It's like the relational part of it, either as someone who's an expert or as on par, or even you're mentoring someone else, right? You might be in the same conversation, I might be mentoring you, and then you might be mentoring me. And just that part makes us peer-to-peer, right? So there's something about that the abundant resources are like people, information, and infrastructure.
Yes.
Oh, and of course, resources. Money. Sorry, Ben.
Yeah. I'm just wondering whether those are specific enough or
How we do it?
Yeah, because I mean, people could mean people to do the work, and that's kind of different from mentoring or And so, yeah, and I don't like relationships. That implies, I don't know a better way to say it, a relationship, not an exchange of value. You know, you can have relationships that aren't. It's
Right.
orthogonal to, you know, helping each other out.
So you think that maybe is networking a better word? It's a bit of game A, but it's sort of more in that direction, I think.
No, I mean, well, I mean, networking is generally the first step to the mentoring or the giving feedback, but it's not that actual step. Networking is finding people to do that.
Right.
But then, I mean, to your point, like one of the resources is knowledge. So that knowledge could be either documented or it could be people. Regardless of how the knowledge is provided. And like in the early case, we're providing all that knowledge through people because we don't have a database. So that's what kind of peer-to-peer information. So, but they're all resources. So, I mean, to me, knowledge is a resource, but I don't know. So maybe if we could get a little bit more specific, maybe funding knowledge and see, infrastructure kind of implies, for a lot of people, implies hardware and not software.
Was it like assets or something super vague?
Yeah. I mean, you could say, you know, tools, although tools still, that implies something you do something with and not the actual thing. Maybe there's no perfect word and we just need to I mean, I like knowledge, and then we could clarify the knowledge to say that it is commons and peer.
That is what I meant by the relate. I maybe used the wrong word, but there's information, right, which can be cataloged, can be database, could be like if you're giving the same advice to everyone, you want it in one location. But there's also, no matter how rich in information that is, there's still something else we offer that is people, right? That is like, that there are people here who also have projects and also care. Like, even if, like, that is part of what we offer. Whether it's mentoring or peer-to-peer, is like a community, the people, even if you're not at a relationship stage yet, right? Like, as soon as you show up, you're at a relationship stage. It's just like how long, and how deep, and how.
Yeah. I guess what I was thinking is that the relationships and just going through something difficult with other people is a separate value than the mentoring. I mean, they tend to happen at the same time, or that knowledge. Abundant resources. So yeah, I think
Camaraderie?
Uh-huh.
Community is just kind of a little, I said camaraderie.
Oh. Yeah, maybe we should just list everything out in the many different ways to say it, and then we can pick and pull. So like relationships, and we could just list them all, actually. Relationships. I still like mentorship because having someone come alongside you that's been through it before, you could still mentor each other. And then
Camaraderie is what I said. Otherwise, if we're just brainstorming, camaraderie and peer-to-peer, or I wish there was a better name for it, but yeah, just.
Well, there is pedagogy, which is the technical term for learning from each other.
Okay.
Pedagogy. What are some other
learning
words?
New words from my peers.
Right.
Pedagogy and pedagogy.
I don't know if that's spelled properly. It's not. What are some other kind of like knowledge commons?
Pedagogy. Hi.
Maybe we should. Do you want to keep it separate to different lines?
Right.
Like one is the people, one is the information, and then one is that infrastructure. Or do
Well,
we
the
want?
problem is people and information overlap.
I get it. Yeah.
I mean, I
Okay.
think we could break them down once we kind of throw them out there. So digital tools. I really should put these all in separate. And I guess there's not going to be any perfect. What else?
And then actual resources, right? So, like money, but also if you have something I can borrow that is going to be, I can't, like I use Adriel's StreamYard, right? Like that's different than borrowing it. It's not costing him anything, but it is still helpful. Like sharing in resources that are not necessarily money, right? Like money and the equivalents, money and things that save you money. Funding and shared resources, I think that's adequate.
Yeah, so kind of software is a shared resource. Infrastructure would be a shared resource. And maybe digital tools is just another way to say software, but I kind of think that like
There's like somewhat of a difference between like StreamYard, which is an outside one that like if I had to have my own, I'd have to, you know what I mean, pay separately versus if we created it, we're setting all of that. So like there's a difference between internal and external, and yeah, sharing in the software fees and the digital fees so that we can all share in them is different than like what do we need and then co-creating it together or bringing it to the commons. But I don't know if it needs to be included.
I think just the end goal is to have a useful pool of shared resources, and if there isn't something effective enough, then we may end up building our own for some of those. But I think it still all goes towards the shared resources, shared tools thing, whether we build it or we're buying it or leasing it from somebody else.
Yeah, and so a world where abundant resources are available to pro omni-win. So I kind of think that if you were gonna, like, we could literally just list all these things out. Our mission is to provide blah 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 blah, and just list them all out. I think you could categorize a lot of these under community, and just clarify later, like the mentorship, the camaraderie, pedagogy, and relationships. Sorry. I'd still like to keep funding and money separate from shared resources, even though technically that's a resource, just because it's very specific. And then I don't know where the knowledge commons falls in.
Now, an interesting thing when we're talking about community, it seems like there's two very different sides to that. Or, I mean, we might be helping to blur those lines, but where one are like the actual community of people working on projects of, like actual possibly developers and marketers and mentors. There's that whole side of things. And then there's the community like users, the people who are actually your audience. And I think it's mainly the first one. And then we're hoping for like a bit of sort of project cross-pollination as things are happening, but I'm not sure if we want to.
Oh yeah, I mean, so this community is specifically the group of people working on it, and I think the other one you were saying could be called a user base.
Can user base go under shared resources? Because that's a little bit like it's not really. I don't get to just like pass off my users, but
right, but like it kind like it's. An audience? Yeah,
Oh,
that's
audience. Although audience, audience implies
like
passive.
it's weird. And it's not shared in quite the same way, right? We're like, for me to share my StreamYard, I just have to give her the information. StreamYard doesn't then have to make its own choice. But whereas for an audience, all you're really doing is saying, hey, check out these projects, follow them if you want to. But I don't know.
It's the idea that like we do have a pool of users that are like TogetherTec members, right? And
Right.
so because there's that pool, if WikiLection brings them in, you're you know what I mean. They're not beholden to TogetherTec, but they're going to be
Right.
more likely through being in WikiLection to be somewhat loyal to whatever comes out through that, right? And same with all like that. Whoever we bring on board is somewhat being brought on board for all of them, if done in that way, right? And that is part of the power of sharing in those resources. Voluntary, sharing of a pool of people that would be interested in multiple parts.
Leaving anything out.
I think that's good. It's just changing them into mission, like actiony things, right? Like creating relationships.
I mean, I kind of like that just being the heading, encouraging facilitate the following resources, benefits for OmniWin projects and ideas works. So I kind of like that as the heading sentence for it.
Someone had posted on Facebook as one of the that the mission suggestion is increase the adjacent possible ? I don't know if I like that for a mission, and I think we already have our vision, but I do. There's something there. Like that is kind of the point, right? Not to create the adjacent possible always does mean that you're also increasing the then possibility of the next adjacent possible, right? Like that's partly the where I think it was before.
I think that's a great phrase and a great thing to do. I don't think that falls into the category of a mission.
Agreed. Are missions tangible, like you when you've done it? Do we know if we have a community?
So yeah, I mean that might be more strategy and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So I was just looking up the definition on Investopedia. It says a mission statement is used by a company to explain in simple and concise terms its purpose for being. But that's our visions. Well, it is our purpose for being. The vision statement is what it'll look like when that purpose is fulfilled. I should have thought about this. Let me do mission versus vision.
I mean, I think we're still going to have to wordsmith and do some stuff with these after we get the basic foundations. I think really we're just trying to define resources so that we may end up having a separate mission for sort of each one of these that all roll up to the overall vision of increasing the resources available for OmniWin projects. Mm-hmm. Which I think then we'll also at some point have the squirrel conversation around OmniWin, but for now we're focusing on resources.
Well, I mean that's really I think all we are. If this group,
that's true. Once we get those two figured out, that's most of it. Just the resources that we're trying to help with, and what projects we're hoping to help with, like that sort of those two sides, and then it's just ironing it out. So I think that this part is still quite important.
I mean I think this is it. It's just wording from here on out and what level you want to go to in the thing.
Yeah, I agree. I think those are exactly what we are doing. And so you try to scroll on your screen.
I'm I'm gonna grade these out for now.
Sounds good.
So we could just wordsmith that, or we could sit with it for a while and wordsmith.
I think partly I looked ahead. Spoiler alert, because now we're going to be talking about how we know if these are accomplished, right? How do we know if the mission is being accomplished? And I think in doing that, we will be wordsmithing, right? Like,
Yeah.
mentorship. Well, how do we know if we achieve it? In figuring out our metrics for achievement, we will figure out how to say it in the mission, if that makes sense.
Right, yeah, it's going to be kind of a feedback loop where as we try to continue on, we're going to have to go back and wordsmith the mission and possibly even the vision a couple more times to sort of make it all a cohesive thing.
Yeah, so I guess we could kind of say mission accomplished on designing the mission, because even though it's not perfect, it's...
So there's that, and then I think the other part is what's OmniWin? Because if we're saying, to provide resources to OmniWin projects, I guess one of the important elements is when we say everyone wins, who's everyone? Like something that might not be obvious is, the environment or animals.
Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know where to put this.
And possibly also, what does win mean? Like, and again, I don't think that we have to get like super specific on the wordsmithing, but just as we start to have these lists of like, okay, what are the resources that we're trying to provide, and who are we helping, and what do we mean by help? And I guess that's the same as resources. But just, and this is, I think, we're going to end up with these 2 or 3 lists that we're going to keep having to come back to and massage and try to figure out how to make them all work together. So, where did I have this? I started like a very rough list where, it was just like, there's people, which is a very broad list, where some of those are going to be like actual staff and people working at the company, people who started, etc. There's your customers. There's a whole other sponsor group where, like, from your suppliers to your competitors. I don't think we're too worried about our competitors also winning in this case. But you wouldn't want to be sort of like overtly hostile. Customers, suppliers, competitors, and then I think also staff. And then on the not people side, there's the environment, which is a broad term. So I'm definitely open to alternatives there. And then sort of in the same vein, but slightly different, is like animals. So things that are actually alive and, can feel pain and whatnot, but aren't people.
It's like all sentient being.
Right, yeah. So sort of like beings and the world. I don't know. Maybe that's too broad.
Well, see, the way I see it, though, the only reason that we keep the environment up is because it has secondary effects on the beings.
True.
So I think that's kind of
air quality. People
Yeah.
need to breathe. So if you're, I think that's true.
I do feel like it's important to have the other animals as one of the, like, the ecosystem itself is important, like the planet, the environment, but also that there are other beings that have emotions and pain and culture and like all of that also need to be taken into effect. And sentient life is probably our more concern, but then even then it's hard to define. Our octopus is sentient. They seem pretty sentient to me, but they're not vertebrates, so we don't give them any rights. Animals.
There's this debate between sapiens and sentience, and awareness versus consciousness, and all of that. And in the Bodhisattva vow, it is defined as all sentient beings as like the totality of maybe not biosphere, but animals and entities that can feel and can feel, basically. That's it. And you cannot ensure that all sentient beings are well if the environment is not well. So it's kind of implied that environment needs to be stable, at least. Unless, of course, we define well-being of sentient beings as possibility to evolve in interesting mutations caused by changes in the environment, but I guess that's not what we are talking about. So.
I think there is the rest of the humans. We have staff, but like, if we're building a factory, there's
So
both
just, like,
all of
the
humanity,
public.
but also the local humans, right? There's like the
Right.
people who are right there, but there's also like, depending on how much impact you have, there's also just all the
Right.
humans,
Like
right?
if you
Local
live
and-
next to a factory, but you're not a customer or staff or supplier or a competitor, but like you still live nearby and don't want to breathe crap.
And I think that for me, anyway, omni win, like win, so that's kind of the omni, that's the all. That
Yeah.
the win part is like, where were they before and where are they now, right? Like
Right.
if we had this thing there, did it improve life for them, right? And for all
Right.
of them, it might be it improves it in this way, but takes from them in this way. So it's like an overall, guys, like our competitors are probably going to be worse off that we're there,
Right.
except that they're also humans. So they're
Right.
like, you
Yeah.
get to breathe clean air, you get to
Which
do that as well.
that seems semantic, like less semantics, but I think it will actually be super important because there's the whole like how much free speech is too free speech. If you are too open, then you actually hurt yourself. Like it ends up kind of being the same thing. Like here's the areas that we do and don't consider winning and sort of things that play. So our competitors as humans, yes. The competing organizations that maybe don't operate under these same principles, go pound sand. We don't care. Our actual goal is to put you out of business and hopefully employ all of your employees gainfully and hopefully better than you were. And then in that reign, everyone wins because I don't think corporations are counted in OmniWin. It's just about people and animals.
And then, what areas are we looking at? Because people care, they have an emotional attachment to their resources, right? Whether they're rich, whether they get their yacht, whether they, that's not, there's like a real concern and a not concern, right? I don't care if we're costing our competitors a yacht. I do care if we're costing people food, clothing, shelter, right? Their basic needs.
Right.
So it's like the perceived impact versus the actual, if that makes
right. So I guess for now, we just call it like improved life stability or access to needs, maybe like improved access to needs. Does it give access to water? Okay. Does it give access to cleaner water if they had crappy water before? And then I think the flip side of that is lessening harm. Kind of the doing good and stopping doing bad.
One thing that I'm just going to put here because I don't know how to put it is just put long-term wins, not short-term. So our future selves, the future humans, the future animals, because right, if we're taking someone's business, if we have a competitor and they go out of business, that may be in their short-term disadvantage. But the ultimate long-term of the fact that we're doing business in a way that externally helps them, the long-term they'll benefit from moving from an extractive job to a
I think that's a really
job.
good point. Yeah, like emphasis on overall sort of long-term, just because it does something good today. Okay, but what's that going to do in a year, 5 years, 10 years? If it's not a long-term win, then it's not actually a win. You're just, borrowing from the future to pay for today. And I think with this one, short wins are great, but I think you're totally right. That long-term is sort of the more important part.
It also feels like in the broader world, they don't take that we need the gas and oil companies to stop. It's like, okay, but is there an alternative? Because I still drive a car. Is there there's the short and long term for our competitors, for us, and meaning that I don't want our business to or TogetherTec to go and dismantle other people's work without giving a replacement, right? Like without there being an actual, like it's easier to put all of our externalities on the oil and gas companies instead of on myself for driving a car, right? So it's like, if I had an alternative fuel source and an alternative way of transportation, that would be more certain. So yeah, I don't know why I'm adding all of this, but long term, I think is really, really important. Sure, improving life access to basic needs.
Yeah. So, I mean, to be an omni, when I'm thinking through the phrasing to say, let me say it the long way. It would be like, if there is any harm to anyone, then they're being any long-term harm, they're being compensated for that.
I see. So like it seems a bit like trying to improve fairness, where like if it can't be totally fixed, okay, you're having this bad, so what can we do to help? Do we give you something? Do we pay you? Do we move you? Like,
yeah, because I don't think that there's a requirement that every action has to benefit everyone or equally benefit everyone.
Right.
But in the minimum, it should not harm anyone. But sometimes you can't even do that. So at least you can compensate.
I like that, which I think kind of moves towards the like progress over perfection. But like that being countered by, okay, well, there are going to be limits, right? Like if it improves for these 90% of people, but like these 10% of people have to go into slavery, well, no, that's not.
Yeah.
I'm also, how we had said before, that a win is an improvement, right? And an improvement in any of these areas. We just have it for life satisfaction. But for instance, I know this is not our realm, but if we're big enough, it might be our realm one day, or someone might, where like a ranch, right? A free range cattle ranch is not kind to cows, but it's kinder to cows than what the other option is, right? So it's like, unless, if I'm eating meat, I want to be able to choose the nicer one, even though it's still passing externalities onto the environment, right? It's just that improvement on what is currently being done.
Right. So for the compensation, I don't think it's necessarily even just long term. I think like even if it's a short term harm, if you can compensate them, you probably still would. It might not be as much.
If you have a guy that, if we put Jeff Bezos out of business, are we going to pay him billions of dollars?
I think we're saying that corporations are immune from this, right? And so thus is employment, because otherwise...
I wasn't saying, yeah, he's a human.
Right.
And so that's where they're perceived, right?
Like that thing of employment in an organization and continued profit, we're saying that like as long as you can meet your needs.
No, he is worth billions of dollars. If we crash his business, he is no longer worth that. That's direct to him. Right. We're causing him short-term harm. The question is, are we obligated within this framework to compensate him?
I mean, for him, it's also still kind of long-term harm because, if you crush the systems around, he's also never going to have that again. But we're sort of trading his long and short-term for the long-term of everyone.
Yeah, so I don't think trading. I don't think trading falls under omni when trading one person for another.
Yeah, and that is
it's not trading, right? If I say that I need to dominate people and have 10 slaves and blah, 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 like, I'm not actually being harmed by not doing that. I'm just like, I wonder if it's almost like a ranking, like where improving life satisfaction is great, but also kind of the last thing. Like if we're lessening harm and doing long-term good and, giving more people access to basic needs, that all comes above just making people happier. Like it's still important.
So if someone,
he would be negatively impacted if we created an Amazon alternative, but he would be negatively impacted from going from being a billionaire to going to be someone who has all of their needs and wants met and doesn't have to worry about someone coming in with a guillotine. I think he would also be better off in the long term, but at the same time, he might not feel that way. But the amount of people who would be better off, the workers, the customers, everyone else, is like, right, but they're nearly infinitely better off without Amazon, and because his long-term cost to the planet, not just the environment, but also it is a monopoly. It is, and growing power and gaining stuff is like what does it look like before our alternative? What does it look like after alternative? Yes, we acknowledge Jeff Bezos is going to go from rich to not rich, or really extremely rich to not so to rich, but not as you know what I mean.
From stupidly
and we're
wealthy
okay
to
with that
extremely
because
wealthy.
it's one person, and one person is like, yeah, we improved all of these people's lives truly, right? We gave them actual satisfaction. Did his satisfaction go down the multiples of the millions of people's satisfaction that went up?
Right.
That's not necessarily what we want to do, because that's just philosophy and like, you know, like not philosophy. You know, I'm trying to say, the train track and like,
yeah,
you can't just make a decision on how it's going to affect
dilemma
happiness. But in this case, I feel like, yeah, we can, because it's one person versus.
Well, it's also Jeff Bezos also gets long-term benefits. He might be rich, he still has to breathe, he still has to eat food.
Yeah, there's such a thing as imaginary pain, and loss of $1 million is, I believe, imaginary pain. If we are not talking about loss of house or like shelter, food, and everything, I just cannot imagine it's the same thing as harm being done to environment or to like a living creature, causing physical pain and internal dissatisfaction caused by being poorer in terms of very imaginary values like the dollar. Kind of, it's not the same thing. So
yeah, one way to kind of say what I'm hearing is reduce someone's access to basic needs. If we're reducing your access to a yacht as an externality for what we're doing, we're not considering that harming you.
Right.
It's go ahead.
Sorry, I was just trying. I wanted to say that it's also exactly not the same thing as taking something by force, or we would be taking his yacht by playing the same game he's already playing. So it's like part of the game, this possibility of being what's the word, apprehended by some better technology or some better way of running a company. So it's not even a harm, it's a direct consequence of playing the same game.
Well, yes, but it's a game. You know, I'm just saying I think we're moving past that principle when we say omni-win. We're saying even if they put themselves in this thing, we're going to try to not have them be harmed by it. Sure. It just depends on how we define harm.
Right. Yeah.
Because even if Jeff Bezos deserves it, or even if we shouldn't reduce him past those basic needs.
Right.
Even if that saves, I don't know if it saves another life. We have to have that whole discussion, but
which I think the basic needs part, because to me that's like, okay, well, let's say you are Jeff Bezos and you have I don't know how much his house is worth. I'm going to say $100 million, and we hurt him so badly he doesn't have a house anymore because he had to. Well, come on, you can get a house, you just can't have your $100 million house, right? So there's a very different, but like basic needs to me, I don't want to state like everyone gets the same wage across the board, but if there is that wage, right, which is around $60,000 that makes people happy, how much is what we're doing raising people to that line versus the amount of people it's dropping? As long as it's not below that line, sorry, yeah, your $10 million house is just not my heartbreak. You know, like it's that, yes, we drastically impacted one person, but we raised this many people to that level, right? We doubled their income from 30,000 to 60,000 or whatever those metrics are. We gave people access to actual goods that weren't feeding off of all of the workers and laborers all over the world. There's something about like a line that is like, is it helping people up to that line, and is it dropping people below that line? It's
like the true version of that saying, or is it like a rising tide carries all ships or something like that?
It's all boats.
There we go. It's that, but like the actual version of that, where we're trying to adjust the water. Some of that might, if you had a super high ship, I mean, that's where the analogy kind of falls apart, where I guess some of it's made from ice and we're taking that.
Well, yeah.
Like we're actually trying to raise the baseline for everyone. We care about people that are under the level, but if you're over it and now people are sort of getting closer to your level, we don't care about that. And if you dropped a bit, are you below the water? No, then we don't care.
Yeah, and
We're going to keep doing what we're doing.
It might be worth writing up a framework that says, here are the things that we're going to try and do. Here are the things we're going to try and not do, accidentally or indirectly. And here are the things that might happen, but we don't really care.
Right.
So we want to get people up to, our first priority, I think, is trying to get as many people as we can up to that satisfaction line.
Right.
And if some people fall down, we don't care. But we're not out to get them.
Yeah,
we're just
game A playing its course, and we're just also playing a game over here. Like if you're playing a game of soccer and part of your rules is we need all the balls in the area, and we want to play a game of a football next to them. If we have a ball that now they don't own, and that ruins their game, sorry, but not sorry.
And it's all voluntary. So we are not forcing people to do anything or to experience a loss of a yacht or a big house. It's all a consequence of the environment, of our mindsets as a human race, just changing to value different things than are valued by game A. So it's all fair game to me.
Yeah, I mean, some of the concepts I think of OmniWin would also say, or some way I think people thought, is that it would be anything that has no negative things, like you wouldn't even be having a rich person have to lose their yacht indirectly. But I guess we're saying we're not shooting for that high of the definition.
Though I would also add that there is the result of some economic systems and some dictatorship. The consequence was to cut everyone down to a certain size of not being very wealthy, so to speak. So in Russia or in Poland, everyone was poor. So it was kind of equality. Not everyone, but most of the people were equal, but equal in poverty. What I'm thinking about here is actively trying to get everyone the possibility of having a life like a standard rich person. So it's not that we are going to take all the yachts and burn them. It would be nice if everyone could get access, at least, access to whatever kind of pleasure experience they want. For example, if there is, if many people want to have or at least go yachting for some time, part of OmniWin would be to actually make it happen, or create conditions under which people can build yacht themselves or something like this. So we are trying to bring the standard up to the level of maybe not Jeff Bezos, but to reasonably reach someone. Right.
And I think that's where it gets weird, because it's not our goal to actively reduce others' resources, but it will be a byproduct just because of how Game A works, right? Like every customer that we take away from Amazon is reducing the resources that Amazon will eventually have. But that's the nature of the game and not our directly intended outcome.
Right.
I like the not actively trying to reduce the resources or satisfaction. Although I'm still going to constantly, in the group, don't kick me out if I'm like, yay, we cut Bezos' wealth in half. It can still celebrate, it can still be part of it, but to try to bring it back to what are we creating as opposed to what are we destroying? What are we, even if I want to do both.
Yeah. And I think it's just a better conversation to have around, hey, look at how many people we lifted above the satisfaction line, as opposed to, hey, look at these 3 people that we dragged down. Well, who cares? They're still above the satisfaction line. That's all we actually care about. Look at these 10,000 people that we lifted out. Way better story to tell anyway. And I think just more effective. I think it's generally more effective to go towards something than away from something.
I like it. We have our what resources meant, what Omni means, and what Win means.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty epic. I was just thinking the other day, I looked up the definition of OmniWin in the Game Bee library, and it was not like I did not find any value in the definition.
It wasn't exhaustive.
It did not provide me any satisfaction.
Like no one won in the definition of OmniWin.
Yeah, exactly.
And honestly, I don't know that what we defined here really fits the ideal of OmniWin. But I think it's a good realistic compromise on what we mean when we say OmniWin in the context of TogetherTec.
Yeah, and I think you just brought up a good point where like it maybe isn't the ideal, and this is at least partially sort of like, okay, so this is, I don't know what you call it, the launch stage where we're still deeply in a game A world, and we have to figure out how it fits there. As it gets more and more sort of clout and more powerful, as it starts to figure out the best way to play the games, I think we'll see clearer depiction. We'll probably have to redefine some terms.
The expanding the adjacent possible, right? Or whatever we're doing, we can't just like OmniWin, like we can't do that, of course, for what you were saying, right? We're in Game A world, but like constantly expanding what that possibly looks like. Again, and everything's voluntary, so we can't just, everyone's at this level, we're not going to tax all these people to remove them to this level, because we don't have the power to do that, even if we wanted to. It's about creating voluntary things that increase everyone's standard of living who wants to participate. And in so doing, happens to cost other people their standard of living. But
I do keep thinking, what happens if my conservative and libertarian friends would watch this discussion? Their fear would be it would trigger them in certain ways that we definitely don't. Like sovereignty, individual sovereignty, which is very, very important to libertarians, is something that we hold dear and is above. I mean, so I think one thing we need to do is kind of list out our values. And then, you know, a lot of my conservative friends have concerns about, I mean, I know several of us in this group are very anti-capitalism, but I don't know that our goal is to extinguish that, but just put it in its proper place. Although I guess we haven't explicitly discussed that. So I could be wrong on several people's opinions, but...
my goal is absolutely to dismantle capitalism, but...
Yeah, so we haven't had that discussion.
That's not, like, I like what you're saying, because it is... We're talking about Jeff Bezos, and I don't think he's the problem. It is and no one's a problem, but like the vast majority of people who do see capitalism as a positive, and so hearing I'm going to dismantle it makes them think they can never start a small business, right? It's all going to go through the government. It's like, no, you just don't start a small business in the same way. It's like you can find a group of people, start a project, own it until it's gone, but you don't. Yeah, in an OmniWin world, you're not going to start a coffee shop that's for profit. That, like, it just doesn't make sense. It's based very much in Game A.
Yeah.
But
and anything you do start,
side,
you wouldn't be taking all the risk yourself. So, like, I think it really is painting a brand new picture that people have never seen. They've only seen the capitalism picture, and they've seen the communism picture, or like the socialism picture, and that's the only two realities that they've really been presented. Where it's like, this government that takes away your sovereignty and runs things, and you know, if they sort of work somewhat efficiently, it can be good in areas. And capitalism, where we have these giant for-profit corporations running everything, and we've seen time and time again that neither one works. But you'll get people knee-jerk reaction to, oh, you don't want giant corporations to run things? Well, the only other option is a giant government, and I don't want that.
Yeah, so I think it'd be an interesting exercise for us to kind of list out values, and even in a priority order if we can, because I think it'd be interesting. I think we would end up with still individual sovereignty and individual responsibility, which is important to some of those groups, is still pretty darn high on the list, if not the very top, which, you know, I'm an American. We think individuality is the most important thing. So I'm biased by where I grew up. But yeah, anyway, so that might be an interesting kind of next step.
Absolutely. I was going to just bring in what Reddick had said earlier of like the perceived slight, right? That like if the thinking you're going to lose $1 million isn't maybe the same point, but I think in this case it is. It's how Trump got elected, right? Like the perceived loss of freedom, the perceived loss of potential in the future is huge for people. And yes, if they hear me say dismantle capitalism, that's all they hear is like, oh my God, we're all going to be standing in long bread lines, right? Which is like, yep, that's history, but this is something new and different. And so like, what does capitalism give you? Yes, like freedom, individuality, innovation. Yep, all of that's here, right? And so I think that yes, values is.
Yeah. So
No,
maybe
it's precisely the other way around. It's not that capitalism gives freedom. It's the freedom that makes capitalism work. And that's precisely what makes it better and what makes it win against socialism, for example. But
yeah, think of how. Go ahead.
Sorry, but just people do not see it that way because, again, on purpose, lack of education and too much of propaganda.
Yeah, and how much more innovation we would have if we didn't have to struggle so hard to meet our basic needs every day. You know, put so much energy into that, which is a kind of unnecessary and is wasted. That could be fulfilled in another way, and that would give us the freedom to innovate. I think a majority of human beings, if given nothing to do, would strive to make the world a better place. I think that's an inbred, not even inbred, but that's a natural part of our
Totally.
chemistry. And that has been something that's been stifled. We'd like to release.
There's that quote, and I'll probably butcher it again, but like, I'm less concerned with the size of Albert Einstein's brain than the knowledge that like somebody smarter than him has died working in a sweatshop or a field.
Yeah, right.
And I think that is, at its nature, one of the things that we're hoping to solve here is, well, hey, if we take all these people and lift them all, because you can't sort of worry about the, you know, lofty ideals and those sort of grand plans if you're struggling below the waterline.
Yeah, the main motto and message and slogan is we need you as you and not you as a lawyer or like a worker or you know, anything that you could do. We don't want you to do anything like special that we think you should be doing. Like pretty much everyone is doing. Pretty much most of the people are working to fulfill someone else's dream, right? And what we need is like you to be you, and that's the best use of you that can possibly be.
Yep. And I think we're right out of time, so maybe this is a good place to stop, and we can all kind of brainstorm on our own about values, and then
Sure.
Sounds good. I was just looking up. I didn't realize you're out of time, but that makes total sense. Like quizzes that are for your values. Would you like me to find one and we can send it out, and then you can like take it and see what your values are? That's what I'm going to be doing because I can never remember what my values are. Which one's first?
If you run across any of those, probably good to share in the Game B projects group, then everyone can see them.
Yeah, might be good to just like find, I don't know, 5 or so like fairly quick ones just to see what the outputs are, because I know that a lot of those tests are garbage. And also,
yeah, we don't need it. It's also just
a lot of the values that they're ranking you on. We're like, yeah, we don't care about those values, but they won't tell you until you've done. So yeah, I think if we find a few, then we can all sort of go through them and figure out which ones actually seem to work, and then maybe try to go through those as a group after to like figure out what is the organization's value as opposed to each individual one.
Yeah, and I would be thinking about the organization's value. If you haven't done your own, then be sure and do that. I have 2 or 3 lists of my values, so I've done that exercise and I have it documented. So I'll just be kind of picking out which ones work for the group, and then. But yeah, bring your brainstorming, and we'll flesh it out together.
All right. Sounds good. And yeah, I think this is an important exercise because for me, the values is like it doesn't matter what our individual ones are. It is about maximizing for all of them, gives us maximization for all of them. Like if we only maximize for one, it's going to cost us all the others. Whereas if we can hold different ones individually, then we can maximize for all of them.
Yeah.
But TogetherTec should probably have an order. We're first this one. If this one's completely negated, we're not having the rest, right? Like it's doing that. So, all right.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. Say goodbye. We're back tomorrow morning for our round table as per usual at the usual time.